President Trump is revealing the topics he and Vladimir Putin discussed at their summit.
Topics he says they discussed.
Saying he is looking forward to their second meeting.
In a series of tweets, Trump said the two talked about stopping terrorism, security for Israel, nuclear proliferation, cyber attacks, trade, Ukraine, Middle East peace, North Korea, and more. Typically, what's called a readout is issued after these things, which actually says what they discussed. This feels like it could be reverse engineered based on 3 days of criticism. So
all right, well,
I don't know.
Let's take it at face value.
Why, Stephanie? Why do we take it at face value? He lies. He then backpedals his lies in an unbelievable way. At what point do people like us say, we're not taking it at face value anymore? The safety of this country is at risk. The president lies repeatedly. Why should we take it at face value?
Not only does he lie, but his press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, makes them even bigger lies, turns them into absolute nonsense. And then his own appointees from our intelligence agencies refute the president. Joining us now, Ambassador Nicholas Burns, former Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs.
Ambassador, first of all, I want to start because you're an ambassador, and there are certain rules that govern how you operate and how you're protected. The concept that Vladimir Putin suggested that an ambassador be subject to questioning by Russian authorities, and that the president responded to that in the press conference by saying that Vladimir Putin made a good suggestion. Just give us some background on context on this.
Well, first of all, Ambassador Mike McFaul, who's a very good man, he's covered by the diplomatic community in the Vienna Convention. President Putin can't investigate him or question him. And secondly, President Trump should have turned Putin down on the spot. It's a ludicrous idea to equate the Mueller investigation, the indictment of the 12 Russian military intelligence officials, with Putin's paranoia about Mike McFaul or David Kramer or Bill Browder. And so the president, I thought, made a fatal mistake and showed his true colors when he didn't stand up for Americans way back on Monday at the Helsinki press conference.
Something stuck out to me today. Earlier this morning, a colleague of ours from CNBC, John Harwood, tweeted this. As all of this unfurls, remember 2 years ago, current House GOP leader told colleagues, quote, there are two people I think Putin pays, Rohrabacher and Trump. When they laughed, he added, swear to God. Current House Speaker then said, no leaks. This is how we know we're a real family. Yes, that was 2 years ago, and they said they were just joking. But put that into the context of the ridiculous circus we have just seen this week. A week when we can't take the president's actions and trace them back to, oh, he's serving his base. None of it makes sense. Put what was said 2 years ago on top of what we saw over the last 4 days, and what do you make of it?
Well, that President Trump is enthralled to President Putin. I think he may be intimidated by him. That was the sense of the press conference. Putin was the dominant figure in that press conference, and President Trump was meek, and I thought very, very weak. It's been a disastrous week for the United States. The president didn't stand up for us on the cyber attack against our elections. He didn't criticize Putin to his face on Ukraine or the nerve agent attack. And then you had this extraordinary interview that hasn't received enough attention that the president gave to Fox News, where he elicited doubt about whether or not he'd back up Montenegro, a NATO ally, if it was attacked by Russia or anyone else. You know, NATO rests on the credibility and strength of the American president. That's for 7 decades. And the president this week has put that very much into question. So I think it's the worst week for an American president in foreign policy in a long, long time.
And maybe the best week for the president of Russia in a long time. You brought up Montenegro.
But hold on. Does it actually hurt him politically?
It will hurt him politically.
Where? Show me where.
Because people like us are not going to take the president at his word anymore. The president lost the faith of the American.
We weren't taking him at his word a week ago, a month ago, or 6 months ago.
You used to say open heart, open mind, and we subscribe to that. There's no open heart and open mind anymore. The president lied and had put the world at risk. I mean, Ambassador, he brought up Montenegro. You just mentioned Montenegro, right? I don't know where the president got this from. He said was it Tucker Carlson? They had a conversation about Montenegro in which he said, you know, Montenegro can be very aggressive. Next thing you know, they'll start World War III, and then we'll be involved in World War III. There's zero chance Montenegro is going to start World War III. Article 5 of the NATO agreement is a mutual defense agreement. If somebody attacks a NATO country, we're compelled to help. The president twisted that around, somehow threw Montenegro under the bus, the newest member of NATO. He must have gotten that information while he was in Russia. Somebody must have has said to him, you better watch out for this Montenegro. They're going to drag you into World War III. At some point, people have to believe this is nonsense.
The interview took place just after the summit meeting in Helsinki, so he may very well have gotten that from President Putin because the Russians tried to foment a coup d'etat 2 years ago against the Montenegro government because they were coming in to NATO. I was ambassador to NATO on 9/11, the American ambassador. Article 5 is a defensive clause. We were attacked, obviously, on 9/11. All of our allies came to our defense. If one of our allies chose to have a war with someone else, the allies would not be obligated. That would just to defend them if it was a war of that ally's choice, and countries could make their own decisions. So the president has fundamentally misconstrued for the American people what NATO is. It's a defensive alliance. Obviously, we rally around countries that have been attacked by an aggressor like President Putin and the Russian government. And if the American president isn't crystal clear about that commitment to our allies, then NATO ceases to be what it's been for 70 years. I think it's the worst thing among many bad things that the president's done this week.
And of course, you were the ambassador to NATO, so you know of what you speak. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.